I'd just like to thank everybody today for tuning in to the team's virtual NORR Ed. It's a little bit different than doing it at the office, but we've expanded it a little bit. So we have NORR Toronto, we have NORR Ottawa, we have expanded to include also our US offices. So we have NORR Detroit, Chicago, and Sacramento. And we also have our furloughed staff that have joined in. In fact, one joined in at 3 o'clock. He was so anxious to get into the NORR Ed today. And we do have somebody calling in all the way from Switzerland. So I've promised that we'll keep this at no longer than 2 hours so he can get to bed at midnight. And thank you for calling in. We also have a number of guests that we've invited. And Patricia Clark did send out the learning objectives. So those of you that are in Ontario, can fill out the learning objectives and send them through to Patricia for your OAA points. Those of you who are architects for the OAA points, so don't forget to do that. Today for the presentation, I'm going to be doing the presentation, and I've asked a number of guests to comment on the presentation in their own words at the end of my presentation, and then we'll take questions after that. So it's a slight deviation on the way we've been doing the presentations. What you see up on screen right now, so hopefully you can maximize the screen because the I can promise you the images will be good in this presentation. Stephanie Fleming has worked with me on the presentation. She's done an excellent job. Unfortunately, she's on holiday. I do want to thank her in advance for the effort that she put into the actual presentation. But what you're looking at right now is where we are today, and we've had 3 presentations, and this year we're doing engineering, architecture, and the Master Series. And today I'm going to be doing the Master Series. And as you can see, Stefano Gugliatti has not confirmed, but he will be the next NORR Ed. So my presentation today will be on Eero Saarinen. This is my bio. Most of you know who I am. I'm chairman of NORR. I've been at NORR for a number of years. I've basically worked for 2 firms, Joseph Bogdan Associates for 10 years, and then started with NORR, been at NORR ever since. My background into architecture was through Humber College of Applied Arts and Technology, and then University of Toronto, and then into my career. And I won't go through this. All of you have it. You can read it or not read it, but most of you know who I am. In the presentation, what I'm going to do with the presentation is talk about Eero Saarinen, but I'm going to try to do it in his words through a number of books that were written by other people, and one in particular was written by him, edited by his wife before he passed away. And this was all in the invite. Eero Saarinen, how did the short 51-year life of a great architect influence the last century, and are these influences seen today? I want to start the story of my interest in architecture starting in grade 9 at George Harvey Secondary School in Toronto, where I specialized in architectural drafting. Not exactly Cranbrook, but in grade 9, we were asked to do perspective drawing, and I ended up selecting Eero Saarinen's TWA terminal. And I found out later that it was probably not a great idea, since the TWA terminal had no right angle triangles, but I persevered and completed that project. And that was my first experience with Eero Saarinen. One of the very few architects to be featured on the cover of Time magazine and Vogue, Esquire, and Playboy in 1961. Eero Saarinen was truly fortunate to have a gifted design mother and father. He grew up in a nurturing design environment, home, and community, Cranbrook. He developed his own approach where every project had its own creative design, shaping his neo-futuristic style. While his life was short, his accomplishments were timeless. The list of projects is a long one today for the presentations, and I'm going to talk about 13 projects between 1947 and 1961, the latter point of Eero Saarinen's life. The story must start with his father, his teacher, his mentor, his employer, until his father passed away in 1950. What a great way to start your career. Ingalls Saarinen was a Finnish architect, a master of the Art Nouveau in Finland, having designed the railway station in Helsinki in 1903. In 1923, the Saarinens immigrated to the USA after Yale entry in the famed Chicago Tribune Tower, which actually won second prize. 2 years later, Yale was accepted the invitation to design the campus for the Cranbrook Academy of Arts, just outside of Detroit. In 1923, he became the head of the institute until he passed away. Cranbrook Academy opened in 1932. And as with all of the projects, I've included a fact sheet, and I won't read the fact sheet. I'll leave you to scan through the fact sheet as with the slides that I have after each of the fact sheets. I'm going to talk about each of the projects. Cranbrook is like no other. It was a part artist colony. It was part school. It was a part museum. And it was a part design lab. It never allowed its students to be burdened by narrow lines separating the disciplines. The school operated on the atelier system. Students worked in groups around masters in each art and craft, pursuing their own projects under the guidance of the teachers. No classes, no grades, only the notion of inspiration. 9 faculty members and 150 graduate students working towards a master's degree. The system was developed by Ingalls Saarinen, who presided over Cranbrook from its founding until his death. Its most distinguished teachers included Karl Miles, the sculptor, Maya Grotto, the ceramist, Harry Bertoia, the sculptor and furniture designer, and Charles Eames, the designer and architect. Those that graduated from Cranbrook included, of course, Eero Saarinen, Florence Schultz Knoll, Benjamin Baldwin, Jack Leonard Larson, and Harry Wees, and many others. Cranbrook was born not as an art school in the ordinary sense, as Saarinen said, but a working place for creative art. The idea was to have artists living at Cranbrook and exclude their work there. Unlike other schools, there was no real Cranbrook style. Saarinen's architecture was itself relatively ideological. It was gentle and an inventive mix of modern and lavish in its detail and craftsmanship, and never quite the same from one building to the next. At the age of 12, Florence Schultz became a friend of the Saarinen family. And this is a very famous photograph of that relationship between Florence and the Saarinens. The Saarinens lived on the grounds of Cranbrook, taught and practiced architecture there. The living room of the Saarinens' home. The Saarinens' firm had some great projects through the years. Talented architects were attracted to the firm. People like Cesar Pelli, Robert Venturi, and Kevin Roche. The one that stood out the most was Kevin Roche, who later partnered with John Dinkloo, who, however heavily involved he was, in the end, basically completed many of Eero Saarinen's projects after his death. Eero Saarinen was internationally respected and recognized. Here on the committee in 1952 of the UNESCO architects, with notable architects of the time like Le Corbusier, Pierre-Luigi Nervi, Marcel Breuer, Ernesto Rogers, Walter Gropius. Internationally, Eero Saarinen was sought after for international design competition juries. Here he is pictured with the original competition model of the Sydney Opera House, and everyone knows the story that he arrived late for the jury, and this model was actually discarded, and he was responsible for bringing it back, and this is the one that actually won. Closer to home, here he is with Ernesto Rogers, of whom both of them were involved in the jury for the Toronto City Hall. And most know that the design that was selected was Vigée Revel's design with John B. Parkin, NORR's predecessor firm. Experimentation and invention seems to go hand in hand in all of Saarinen's work. And if you read the quote, which is Saarinen's quote, that is extremely true in most of this work that you'll see in the projects that I'm going to present. And most of this really does tie back to Cranbrook. Saarinen's Gateway Arch is the world's largest arch. But for a very short period of time, Eero's father thought that he had won the competition and not his son. You have to remember when the competition was held, Western Union Telegraph sent the telegraph to Mr. E. Saarinen of the firm. LL assumed that he had won. Both father and son had separate competition entries. The two designs submitted by the firm could not have been more different. It was soon after that the competition jury confirmed that it was Eero's design and not LL's design that had been selected. Certainly wouldn't have wanted to be around the family house after that distinction had been made. The arch is a catenary curve, 635 feet high, located on the water's edge of the Mississippi River, on a raised 25-foot plaza with steps of descending depth towards the top. The arch is centered on the historic courthouse and symbolizes the western expansion of America. Eero Saarinen worked with structural engineer Fred Severn. The inverted catenary arch is created by equilateral triangles of steel stacked on top of each other. And this is a great drawing that shows the composition of those triangles starting at the bottom and moving their way up. And the engineers in the audience will appreciate this, although the architects should and will understand the pieces as they go up, and in particular, the stainless steel, which was a first at the time to be used as a cladding on an arch of this size. The bottom stacked triangles are concrete fill, while the upper triangles are empty until the top, which is filled by the observation deck. The triangles are lifted by a climbing derrick on the outside of the arch. The triangle pieces being lifted into place by a 100-ton derrick that lays its own tracks as it moves up the outside of the arch. And this is the final triangle at the top of the arch. The very last triangle being fitted in at the top. The top observation deck is accessed from a project-designed elevator cab from each side, known as the Ferris wheel trains. The elevator cab design was based on the interior of a 1961 Ford Falcon, and it was designed by the Saarinen design team. The elevator cab is placed in a barrel or drum with wheels that turn to maintain level as it moves up the arch, an innovation for the solution. The Gateway Arch remains one of the most iconic monuments for the city of St. Louis and the world. General Motors Technical Center, 25 buildings, research, process development, engineering, styling, and a service center, with central restaurants arranged as an assembly line around 22-acre pool, with a sculptural spherical water tower and a water ballet fountain designed by Alexander Calder, set in a surrounding forest of greenbelt on 300-acre site. The master plan of General Motors Technical Center, the 300-acre site, centered around a 22-acre pool in the middle. General Motors is a metal working industry. It is a precision industry. It is a mass production industry. Thus, the design is based on steel, the metal of the automobile, and down to the smallest detail. We try to give the architecture the precise, well-made look, which is a proud characteristic of the industrial America. Back to Cranbrook, ceramist Maya Grotto was commissioned to develop colored ceramic bricks of brilliant blues, reds, yellow, and orange. When I graduated in 1976, there were bricks like this being used in the industry. Never did I think that they were actually developed for this building. The Engineering and Design Center luminous ceiling was an innovation for its time. This was not something that came out of a catalog. It was actually designed for the building. The styling dome, stainless steel dome on a one-story gray tone ceramic brick base. The building reflects the use of the interior function. The styling dome and its relationship to the forecourt on the exterior. The styling dome functionally designed to produce the best artificial lighting environment to design car bodies. The entire project is based on a 5-foot grid planning module for maximum flexibility. The main entrance with luminous ceiling and mechanical stainless steel grid and integrated grills for HVAC system. The exterior walls are full floor to ceiling glass, something that we see today throughout the industry, and this is where it started. The reception desk and furniture were specifically designed for the project by Harry Bertoya and Charles and Ray Eames, another connection to Cranbrook. Floating staircases in stone suspended by steel rods from the ceiling to the floor in front of ceramic brick walls. The centerpiece of the research building was a major interior design element in keeping with the automotive industry, steel and detailing. The floating stair in the research building was a key design focus of Kevin Roche. 1,500-pound steps suspended in an innovative design form, the outside and the one point in the center. Opened in 1956, Architectural Forum called it an architectural feat which may be unique in our lifetime. Life magazine called it the Versailles of industry. It is mid-century modernism at its finest. The next two projects are on the same site. Saarinen said that in arriving at a concept, they began with the basic consideration of the program, the spirit of expression of the program. The first is a chapel. Saarinen said the round cylinder seemed right for an individual to come to pray and be intimate with the altar. It is also the same shape as the Gothic baptistries throughout Europe. The simplicity of the 50-foot cylinder and its connection to the building. The plan is reminiscent of church baptistries, as I've said earlier. And if you look at the form, the in plan as well as in section, is very close to church baptistries throughout Europe. The chapel cylinder is simple but very complex in detail. The exterior incorporates mechanical systems as well as indirect lighting from the moat surrounding the cylinder. The solid masonry cylinder tube is founded on a series of granite piers supporting arches to carry the exterior wall of the chapel. The granite piers sit in a reflective pool of water that reflects into the second concrete tube of the chapel. The use of the traditional material was chosen, which was the same as the surrounding dormitories. The entrance to the chapel is by the glassed walkway. This, in a sense, acts as what Saarinen referred to a number of times in his church buildings as a decompression area before entering the chapel. The walkway is glassed on both sides and leads into the chapel. In a sense, it is the nave of the church. The glass shows the arts and craft treatment, again, from Cranbrook, in color and obscuring the view it creates the decompression walkway into the chapel. The interior of the chapel is dark, no windows except for a hole in the roof over the altar. Saarinen said that it was reminiscent of the Spartan village moon that he saw as a student in his travels. The light streams down on a golden screen by Harry Bertoia. Secondary light is reflected up from the surrounding moat through the cylinder arches. Here you have the full effect of Harry Bertoia's sculpture onto the solid Carrara marble altar in the dark cylinder. This is what Saarinen imagined. The simplicity of the altar block against the sculpture. The Bertoia sculpture, again, influences from Cranbrook. The interior wall bricks undulate to enclose HVAC systems delivered through openings made by leaving gaps in the brick wall, which creates a screen. The light from the moat reflects up into the sides. The chapel's bell tower design was entrusted to sculptor Theodore Rozak, who Saarinen would continue to work with on many of his later projects. The bell tower sculptural design completes the simple cylinder, but makes a strong statement of its own from the sides. The second building on the same site at MIT is the auditorium. Here, Saarinen chose to express the form of the auditorium in plan and felt that it should be covered by a dome structure sitting on 3 points. Clearly at the time, this was an experimental building, both in shape and construction. Early design sketches and the final design simplified. The auditorium floor plan is intuitive, what the plan wants to be for an auditorium. From a functional design perspective, as Saarinen said, it works and is efficient. Even the pre-function area is right, as Saarinen would always describe his projects. The two buildings dialogue with each other as a testament to Saarinen's abilities. I'll leave you to read this before I go on to the next image. And it is an important quote by Saarinen. Joseph Irwin Miller and his wife, Jenya's house in Columbus, Indiana, was their year-round residence, hosting family gatherings and meetings with business associates. Owner of Cummins Diesels, Millers were great industrialists and commissioned buildings by other architects like I.M. Pei, Richard Meyer, and Harry Weiss. The team behind the design included, in addition to Saarinen, Kevin Roche, who played a pivotal role, and also included Dan Kiley, the landscape architect. The architecture of the building and the landscape were equally important in the overall design of the Miller House. The plan of the house starts with the Palladio 9-square grid plan and develops an interior pinwheel arrangement of progression around the commercial seating area, recessed into the marble floor. The honey locust trees intercept the house's gridded plan into the geometric gardens designed by Dan Kiley. Inside and outside are developed to work together, including the area between the two. The 9-square grid flat roof is lined with skylights along the grid, bringing natural light into the house. The communal space is the center of the house and is lined on one side with a 50-foot storage wall. The sunken communal space has views of the gardens outside. The dining area has the Knoll Tulip series table and chairs designed by Saarinen. While each room is separate, the pinwheel design lures you into the next space. The children's area is separated but opens directly into the gardens. You can see from the typewritten list, art was one of the most important pieces of the overall project and elements of the home. And as I said earlier, there are a number of architects that worked with the Millers with other homes, but Saarinen was called upon to actually build their summer residence in Canada. And this was the Millers' residence designed in Windermere in the Muskokas in Canada for their summer residence. The chair, there are two chairs, but I'm going to speak about the pedestal series. Saarinen's initial sketches for the Tulip chair. He said, "The undercarriage of chairs and tables in a typical interior make an ugly, confusing, wasteful world. I wanted to clear up the slum of legs. I wanted to make the chair one thing again." Saarinen had hoped to produce the chair in one piece of fiberglass, but the material would not support the base. As a result, the base of the Tulip chair is cast aluminum with a Riesling-coated finish to match the shell. The upper shell is molded fiberglass and reinforced bonded finish. The upholstered foam cushion is removable with Velcro fastening. The patent was awarded in 1960. Florence Snow and Eero Saarinen and the cast aluminum Tulip base, the essence of the Tulip series. Saarinen and his family in their dining room. The Tulip series is considered space age, used in Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey, Star Trek, and today still continues to elude futuristic design. Eero Saarinen's apartment was not only the Tulip series, but the later room chair, also designed for Knoll in continuing collaboration with childhood friend Florence Schultz Knoll. Theodore Roszak's eagle may or may not remain on the 1960 Eero Saarinen U.S. Embassy, which relocated to 9 Elms in the city of London, England in 2018. Saarinen's 1960 building has been sold to become a hotel. The chancery is in harmony with the square and its low row houses in mass and cornice height. Portland stone was used as ornament and trim on the pseudo-Georgian row houses, and it was used as the main material for the chancery. Portland stones seem appropriate, as it is also the general material used for official buildings in London. Over time, it ages well in the London environment. Saarinen said, though the choice of materials and the character of the building, we tried to create a formality which expresses the meaning of the building. The layering of the exterior is reminiscent of the Venetian Doge's palace. The security design of the time, the ground floor is set back with a slope base up to a railing around the setback on the ground floor. This gives you a better vantage point of the ground floor setback and the railing around the building. The ground floor entrance, as it was as a chancery in 1960, now to become the entrance lobby for a hotel. Eero Saarinen said that the David S. Ingalls hockey rink was one of the best buildings that he had ever done and was very proud of it. At the start of the project, he sent out his team to research rinks in the US and at other universities, and they came back with the conclusion that they all thought that they were ugly, flat-roofed boxes. Saarinen was determined to design the best rink that he could at Yale, and obviously it was the most expensive as well. Boat-like construction in concept, spine like concrete arch with suspended cables anchored to the exterior walls, wood planks for the roof deck. The plan is set into the site, locating the best seats with the best view lines of the hockey rink on the sides. The section shows the rink is how it's set into the actual site. An image of the concrete spine under construction. Saarinen noted that the Yale hockey rink marked an important movement in his work, strengthening his conviction about making everything part of the same, what he called the form world. It gave us the confidence about handling vaults and suspended roofs and would influence his later works. IBM Blue. Advanced technology and beauty in the same space, demonstrating corporate faith in the future. A campus in Rochester. A master plan campus for technology of its time, a series of buildings and courtyards. The Minnesota blue sky, IBM's name, Big Blue, could be credited for the blue cladding of the project. The employees that worked here at the time called it the Big Blue Zoo. Not one color of blue, but two, and pattern in the curtain wall creates the design interest. Once again, a Cranbrook influence. From a distance, it simply looks blue, like the shades of the blue sky. Up close, you see the blue pattern and the detail from the spandrels to the glass, vision glass. Further away, the blue mixes with the green landscape. The blue tint enters the interior of the building. As with GM before it, floor-to-ceiling glass bringing inside and outside together. The interiors, again, studies a reflection of Cranbrook, whether they were hard materials or fabrics. The manufacturing areas of IBM, of course, machinery was all blue. The cafeteria areas. The campus entry, formal, as with GM earlier, but more tame. Internally, the courtyards provided relief for the employees. Dan Kiley was the landscape architect, the same as the Miller House and other Saarinen collaborations. Here, a Japanese garden. Big blue, distinctive and elegant and timeless. This is another very important Saarinen quote about his work and his approach to his projects. As I said before, when I was 16 and in grade 9, this was my favorite building. Today, it remains one of my favorites, making the transition from terminal building to hotel. I wanted to share a video of George Baird, who was my professor at the University of Toronto. Having graduated himself from U of T in the 60s, he later became a professor there and later in his career, the Dean of Architecture at U of T. Prior to his return to become the Dean at University of Toronto, he went on to Harvard to become the director of the master's degree program of architecture. He did this all while being a partner of his own architectural firm in Toronto. When asked about one of his most memorable points in his architectural history, this is what he said.
I've been thinking about what the most memorable moment in my architectural education was. And remember, we're talking late 1950s now. And I think the episode that I remember most markedly is one in which I, as a reasonably good student in the program, who, as far as I and my fellow students knew, got along reasonably well with the faculty, found himself receiving a failing grade for a design project. And this was a design project in which I had fallen under the influence of Eero Saarinen, who was at that point in time in the middle of his TWA terminal at Kennedy Airport phase and was doing very flamboyant Baroque designs, something I haven't done much of for the rest of my career. In any event, I fell under the spell of Saarinen and prepared this student scheme, quite influenced by his then fashionable design direction, only to meet with the stern disapproval of the faculty who were teaching the studio. And the other thing I remember about it was how shaken my classmates were that someone who apparently got along so well with the faculty would be failed on a design project for such an apparently ideological reason. So that's my memorable moment.
Eero Saarinen drew inspiration for TWA while, believe it or not, eating a grapefruit. He split it in half and flipped it upside down and pressed it in the center. As he did, the grapefruit bulged out. The inspiration for TWA was born. The structure consists of 4 intersecting barrel vaults supported on 4 Y-shaped columns. Together, these vaults are 50 feet high and 315 feet long, making an umbrella over all the passenger areas. Some say it looks like a bird ready for flight. Some called it Baroque architecture. Some called it neo-futuristic. I would say it is 20th century modernist. I'll leave it up to you to decide what TWA is. The challenge, according to Saarinen, of TWA terminal was twofold. To create within the terminal of Idlewild a building that would be distinctive for TWA, and secondly, to design a building which the architecture itself would express the drama and the specialness and excitement of travel. He said, we wanted the architecture to reveal the terminal not as a static place, but a place of movement and transition. The main passenger areas open directly onto views of the apron and aircraft, which for that time was unheard of. The seating is sunken below the passenger traffic area, reminiscent of what he did in the Miller House. In studying the problem in model after model, both exterior and interior, we realized that having determined on the basic form of vaulting, we had committed ourselves to a family of forms that must be carried throughout the entire building. All the curvatures, all the spaces, and all the elements down to the shapes of the signs, information boards, railings, and counters would have to be consistent. The total environment, which each part belonged to the same form world. Saarinen's acknowledgement that Baroque architects were wrestling with the same thing. Within the limits of classical order, they were trying to see how to create non-static architecture. The shapes of the vaults deliberately chosen in order to emphasize an upward soaring quality. The interior elements all belong to the same form world. The concrete shell vaults having a soaring non-static quality which hovers over the entire terminal. Saarinen last visited the site on April 1961, before it was completed, and he noted, TWA is beginning to look marvelous. If anything happened and they stopped work right now and just left it in this state, I think it would look like a great ruin, like the Bassa Caracalla. TWA was completed in 1962, but closed in 2001 and reopened the 15th of May, 2019, not as a ruin, but a restored Saarinen TWA hotel. Eero Saarinen designs a new jet-age airport for the nation's capital. Ingalls is unique in its ownership by the federal government and a gateway into the national capital. Saarinen said, "The traditional federal architecture is static, but the jet age airport should not be static, expressing the movement and excitement of travel." The terminal, a single compact building, was a covered roof, high in the front, slightly low in the middle, slightly higher in the back. Like the Ingalls Rink, it is a suspended roof. The roof is suspended from a row of columns 40 feet apart on each side of the concourse, 65 feet high on the approach side and 40 feet high on the field side. Washington International is the first commercial airport to be designed for the jet airplane. We sent our team with counters and stopwatches to see what people really do at airports, how they walk, how they interchange, what analysis we needed to do, examine schedule, peak loads, effects of weather. We studied baggage handling, economics, methods of operations, and so on. All of those things that I think Ralph Orr is on the line, that Arup did when Arup was Napa at NORR and continued to do. And they reduced all of that down to 40 charts and arrived at 3 main design challenges: time and inconvenience of getting the passengers to the planes, the heavy cost of moving the jet airplanes, increased flexibility in the operation. And what Saarinen's team developed is the moving lounge, departure lounge on wheels. The central tower in the scheme is placed back of the terminal. Like always, physical models were extensively used in the design process. Here, Eero Saarinen and Kevin Roche working on the Dulles International through models. Another image, and you can see how well they get into their models and into the space. The non-static columns under construction. The terminal building suspended roof under construction. The innovation, the mobile lounge, moves from the terminal building to wherever the plane is parked. Saarinen said in 1961, "I think this airport is the best thing I've ever done. I think it is going to be really good. Maybe it'll explain what I believe about architecture." In 1996, the terminal was expanded to 2 times its length in keeping with the Saarinen design. This is the 1961 Saarinen design terminal, the 1961 original building, and the 1996 as it exists today. This is the terminal building in homage to Saarinen. This sketch is the inspiration for the headquarters building for America's farm equipment manufacturer, Deere and Company. Set on a wooded 1,400 acre site with 2 man-made lakes, 3 buildings include an office building, an auditorium, and a display building, connected by bridges across ravines. The airfold lines bear resemblance to Japanese temple architecture and Palladian planning. William Hewitt, Deere and Company's new president's strategic plan in 1955 was sales, profits, ratios, quality, new designs, safety of operations, excellence in employees, dealer stock, public relations, and included build a new office building. Hewitt said, In thinking of our traditions and our future, I believe it should be thoroughly modern in concept, but at the same time, be down to earth and rugged. This is the section of the three buildings. The administration building plan offers views on all sides over the wooded area. The top plan is the typical administration floor, and the bottom is the executive level with exterior walkways. The three buildings sit in a wooded site and ravines connected by bridges. Sasaki enhanced the site with the two man-made lakes and landscaping. Deere and Company was a farm machinery company proud of its Midwestern farm belt. Farm machinery is not slick, shiny metal, but forged iron and steel in big functional shapes. Saarinen sought an appropriate material, economical, maintenance-free, bold in character, and dark in color. The Deere and Company headquarters pioneered the use of weathering steel, high tensile steel known today as Corten. In 1957, Deere, the design of the exterior cladding system was innovative for its time. Sun shading, exoskeleton, building systems, view of the offices. Saarinen said, having secured the site because of the beauty of nature, we are especially anxious to take full advantage of the views from the offices. To avoid curtains, we worked out a system of sun shading with metal louvers and reflective glass to preserve the views. The lower bridge connections between the buildings, the main administration building and the views over the man-made lakes, the open bridge connections between the buildings, and then the John Deere display building and its upper balcony walkway. Rugged, honest, and close to the soil was Hewitt's mandate. Although the building was completed 2 years after Saarinen's death, Kevin Roche succeeded in meeting the mandate. Kevin Roche also went on to complete Saarinen's Ford Foundation headquarters in New York City, also using weathering steel. North Christian Church was an opportunity to rethink the design of the modern church. In his interview for the project, the story goes that there were a number of major architects that were brought in. Eero Saarinen, in the interview, brought his notebook and asked 3 questions. What do you want? What do you want it to be? Don't tell me what you want it to be. Just tell me what you like it to be. At the end of the interview, he left and he was hired immediately for the church. Saarinen saw North Christian Church as an opportunity to reinvent the design of the church. Unlike cathedrals, churches of the past, today Sunday school, fellowship, kitchens, gymnasium, and square dancing rooms are part of the church. He decided to put those functions below the sanctuary. The sanctuary, like the MIT chapel, has an oculus allowing light from the top under the 192-foot spire. The sanctuary is also elevated so that you descend down a mid-level and then back up into the sanctuary. Saarinen saw this as a decompression area before you enter into the sanctuary. Saarinen said in 1961, I want to solve the design as an architect so that when I face St. Peter, I'll be able to say that out of the buildings that I did during my lifetime, one of the best was a little church because it was a real spirit that speaks forth to all Christians as a witness to their faith. The last project that I'm going to present is Black Rock, the New York City headquarters for CBS, which in 1960 was the most important radio and television corporation in the world. 51 West 52nd Street, corner of 6th Avenue. The 5-foot planning grid ends on the exterior with 45-degree projections alternating with vision glass. The 45-degree projections enclose the building M&E systems. The 38-story sheer freestanding tower is set on its own sunken plaza set back from the sidewalk edges. Unlike other towers like Seagram's of the time, it sits on a plaza of the same time. Black Rock stands as a distinctive, solid, unlike the glass towers of its time. Saarinen wanted the strength and the dominance of the black granite. The 45-degree piers are concrete and hollow to contain the ducts for the HVAC system to serve the building. Canadian black granite was used. The granite is not polished, but was flamed, and it breaks the reflectivity of the glass. The interiors for CBS were another collaboration with Florence Knoll, longtime family friend. Knoll's influence in the executive offices of CBS. I want to end the presentation with Saarinen's answer to the purpose of architecture, which he made at Dickinson College in 1959. He said, "The purpose of architecture is to shelter and enhance man's life on earth and to fulfill his belief in the nobility of his existence." And with that, that's the end of my presentation on Eero Saarinen, the great architect. I have asked a number of guests to comment on the presentation, and I'm going to start with a Finnish Canadian architect from the NORR office, Rolf Kartinen, and I'm going to move to his first slide, and Ileana, you'll turn the microphone over to Rolf Kartinen.
Okay. Well, any good Finnish presentation has to begin with the epic poetry of the mid-19th century by Elias Lönnrot. From this was created a series of paintings by Akseli Gallen-Kaleva. This actually turned into the genesis really of Finnish design and modern design. And to actually understand Eero Saarinen, you have to understand Elias Saarinen. From this poetry and from these paintings, which are actually housed in a museum in Helsinki, came motifs and actually the sensitivity to design and the art of design and the craft of design. One thing I'll note on this picture, if everybody takes a look, this is the saving of the Sampo, is the character in the white hair who looks very much like a character in Lord of the Rings, and I'll leave it to you to figure out. These paintings and epic poems were heavily borrowed on the Rings for their iconography. The next slide. This is one of the early pictures of the Saarinen home, just north of Helsinki, about an hour outside of Helsinki, called Vitrask. This was built in 1901, 1903, and this actually served as a form of Taliesin, similar to Frank Lloyd Wright. This was where the family came, this is where they worked, and this is where they actually hosted people, and this was probably the early Cranbrook. The Saarinen family held this property until the 1950s, despite leaving in the 20s. And this actually has now turned into a Finnish National Museum, and it's the home of the family. And this was really the first forms of Finnish national romanticism and architecture and design. And the picture doesn't do it justice how finely crafted the building is and the craft of design. So if we go to the next slide. This is the Finnish National Museum, and I'm just going to my cheat sheet here. And won in a competition in 1902 and finally finished in 1912. This is a perfect example of Finnish national romanticist design. Interesting time for Finland and for the Saarinen family. Finland was in the midst of gaining its independence after years of oppression under Swedes and Russians. And they were then coming up to actually fighting a civil war in 1917 in line with the Russian war. In this case, the White Army won, not the Red Army. And there was a big building boom, and there was a lot of pride in design and in the detail of design. The last slide. We couldn't show a picture without a massive transportation facility from myself. This is one of the most iconic buildings in Finland and Helsinki, done by Yale Saarinen. And the building is incredibly crafted. It was completed in 1919. It was won again in a competition, which was a very democratic way for commissions in Finland at the time, and even till today, and probably what led Yale Saarinen to leave, as he entered numerous competitions throughout his life and career in Finland. This was won in a competition, went through many iterations, but this still stands as one of the most iconic buildings. It's a spectacular building, a railroad station, transportation hub, buses, trams, and they've now connected a subway station to this as well. So I guess the one thing I would say is you can't understand Eero Saarinen without understanding Yale Saarinen and basically the love and the craft of design and building, because these are impeccably designed and constructed buildings in Helsinki. That's it.
Rolf, thank you very much. And we're proud to have a Finnish Canadian architect on our team. So the next guest that we have is from our Detroit office, and it's Chad Menard. And obviously the Detroit office is not that far from Cranbrook. And I'm going to ask Chad to come on the line.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Silvio.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So Silvio's invited me to speak a little bit about Cranbrook. So Cranbrook, obviously everybody knows it's in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and the Saarinen family moved here in the 1920s. And Ilio, which is Eero's father, was commissioned to do the Academy of Arts. And, you know, this school was really an experimentation, and nothing like this has ever been done before. And so a little bit about the school itself. It has a K through 12 program, and then you can either go into the Institute of Science or the Academy of Arts. And it also has a contemporary art museum on campus. And I really truly believe that it was there to celebrate the achievements of all the great masters that have gone through this school. It was really truly a collaborative program, and Eero, you know, being infused into this at an early age was really a byproduct of what the school was creating. So he was very well versed in many and able to look at design solutions through not just an architect's eyes. I mean, he could see it through an engineer's eyes. He could see it through a sculptor's eyes, and he was involved. So they ended up taking 150 students from 10 different disciplines and putting them on one roof, mixing them all together, and really seeing the experiment come to fruition of the collaboration efforts being amongst them. We're seeing that now in some of the the STEAM philosophies that are coming in more of the modern approach to education, and having different students interact with each other and looking at a solution from different angles was really what Saarinen was able to do. One of the things that Silvio had mentioned, that there was a large models that were built in the studio, and it was really this collaborative approach that he learned from Cranbrook. He would create the model into the middle of the studio and then have everybody come in and really look at the model and critique the model and really get this final solution. And I think he was not just collaborative with the architects, he was collaborative with the artists, he was collaborative with the owner. And I believe that's why his projects were very different from each other. And really the foundation of his career really started here in Cranbrook. Thank you. So just to mention as well, we did interview at Cranbrook with the director, and we're hoping to get work here. And when we do, we're going to be inviting everybody to participate in the design efforts. So if we do get a project on campus, you're gonna definitely hear from us. So
I'd like to be on that team if I can.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Chad. Thank you very much for those words. So the next person I'd like to ask upon is David Barrington, and I'm asking a number of different people, but David is an engineer, and I think that the building that he's going to be talking about is definitely appropriate for him. And David, if you want to come on, David is going to be talking about the Gateway Arch.
Thanks, Silvio. I visited St. Louis in about 2009. And it was almost 50 years after the construction of the St. Louis Arch. And it's just awe-inspiring to see it. It's so simple in its structure, the triangular shape of the arch, and then the actual form of the arch. It's a perfect inverted catenary, and geometrically, it's so special that way because it's so simple. From a structural engineering perspective, it's amazing to see that something like this could be built 630 feet high. And the odd thing is people don't understand that it's 630 feet across the base. It's an optical illusion. It really looks taller than it is wide, but it's actually the same width across the base. The form is structurally sound because the arch naturally dissipates the forces of gravity down through the form of the structure. The interesting aspect of how this was built is that it's 300 feet of concrete, tubular concrete. It's a structure that's built with an interior core of carbon steel, and then a concrete core that goes up 300 feet on each leg, and then transitions to structural steel framing in a triangular form that carries right up to the top. The other aspect that's incredible about the construction of the arch is that the arch was built with starting from each side and then joining in the middle. The accuracy, the pinpoint accuracy of the surveying that had to be done, and the construction accuracy, if the construction was out by 1/64th of an inch on the bases, it would never have met at the top. So it's really something to see the construction of such a huge arch, and I think it stands the test of time with respect to an architectural design so simple, and the structural design that went along with it by Fred Severin, who worked with Saarinen to create this beautiful monument in St. Louis. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. The next speaker that we have is someone that spent some time at MIT and is going to talk to us about what's a small building, but what I think is just an incredibly important building. And I'm going to ask upon Peter Dubin to come on.
Thanks, Silvio. So Silvio did an amazing job walking us through the MIT chapel. I'm not going to revisit each of the elements that he talked about, but I am going to revisit them in a slightly different way and put a kind of a personal spin on things. The chapel is situated right in the center of the MIT campus, and it's across from the architecture school. So I literally saw that building every morning and every night for a couple of years because I did my graduate work there. Today, the MIT campus has a number of Starchitect buildings, which are these alien spaceships that have dropped down into the MIT landscape, buildings by Stephen Hull and buildings by Frank Gehry. But back then, everything was Georgian revival and neoclassical. So when they asked Saarinen to do the chapel building and the Kresge Auditorium, it was really an unusual thing, and the buildings are completely different from everything else on the campus. And it's a kind of an extraordinary pair of buildings because you've got one architect designing the sacred and the profane, and they're sitting side by side, one for prayer and introspection and one for public discourse. And as I said, they're right in the middle of the campus, and nothing else on the campus looked like them at the time. The chapel is built with, I'm going to say, 4 common elements, only 2 of which are actual building materials, and they are among the most plain and common of all building materials, brick and wood. But the other 2 elements that he built that chapel with are equally as important: light and water. And without those 2 elements, the building doesn't exist. So I'm going to talk about each of these just for a hot second. There's a disagreement among historians. Some say that he took this perfect cylinder and he set it down into a pond. Others say that he took this perfect cylinder and he surrounded it by a moat. And this is, I think, one of the wonderful things about Saarinen is that you can look at his work in many different ways, that it's very layered. It's layered with meaning, it's layered with symbolism, and it's layered with texture. I think they're both right. It's a building set into a pond, and it's also a building surrounded by a moat. If you look at the kind of a spectrum of life with science and technology on one end of this spectrum and spirituality and emotion on the other, one is very outward and one is very inward looking. MIT is this frenetic, exploratory environment, always looking outward. So I think that by putting this moat in there, it's not a defensive moat, but it's a separation from one world that's the entire rest of the MIT campus, and that small sanctuary, this place for introspection. And so it was a symbolic gesture when you cross that moat, and it was the same symbolic gesture for the entryway, which has on either side of it a pastiche of small panes of glass with different levels of obscurity, so that as you're walking through this narthex, the greenery on both sides becomes this magical blur of nature until you get inside of the chapel, where there's this kind of explosion of light. And it's really important to note that except for the altar block, which was of the beautiful white marble, the entire chapel is built of the most common of materials. There's this outside wall, pure sphere of brick, but the inside wall, which is undulating, has, and for me, this is almost the most important part of the chapel. It's got all these gnarly reject malformed bricks which are set into this undulating wall. And these bricks in and of themselves are the ugliest of reject bricks. But when you set them into this wall, they become part of this incredible, beautiful fabric. And it's these gnarly reject bricks which are sticking out, which catch the light that's coming up from the sides of the building and cast the most beautiful shadows on that wall. For a minute, Bertoia's altarpiece, again, there are two ways to look at this. You can look at this sculpture as pieces of metal that are catching sunbeams coming down from above. But the way I always saw it is because of the densification of metal at the base, I saw an explosion of light and then light shooting up to the heavens as opposed to coming down from below. Again, there are so many ways that you can look at Saarinen's building. And then finally, and because this is our personal statement, I'm going to tell you that after I left MIT, I stayed in Cambridge and I went to teach design at the Boston Architectural College. It's called the Boston Architectural Center back then. And one of the courses I taught was titled Movement in Architecture. Movement being metaphorical, not literal, but this course had everything to do with my relationship with this Saarinen building that went on for years and years, this place of sanctuary where I went to visit it occasionally just to decompress. And that's my story.
Peter, thank you for those fantastic words. I mean, it's one of my favorite buildings as well. But I envy the fact that you got to see it almost every day for how many years?
Well, I was working also, and I passed it when I was working, so for about 4 years.
Yeah, too many years. Thank you, Peter. The next speaker that we have is from our Ottawa office, and he's going to talk about Saarinen's building that is a building that's going to be converted into a hotel, and that's the Chancellery in London. So Tobias Fellows is going to be next. Tobias?
Hi, Silvio, and thanks for inviting me to be able to speak with Eero Saarinen. And just like to also thank Peter for that great story about one of the Eero Saarinen buildings that I have actually been to, the chapel. My first encounter with the Eero Saarinen building was the TWA terminal. I was very young. I was probably around 14 at the time, but I still can remember just the sense of excitement being in that building. It kind of exudes that, as was expressed in Silvio's presentation. And you really feel that when you're in one of his buildings. Later, while I was studying at the School of Architecture, I went on a trip, a school trip to Boston, and we saw the MIT chapel. For me, the resolution of the form, the simplicity of the program left me with a sense of awe and calmness. And it's something that when you see a good piece of architecture, it affects you. And I think above all, Eero Saarinen's projects are very emotive in how they affect me, at least. Although I haven't been to the U.S. Embassy in London, I believe they would also trigger an emotional response. It would also trigger an emotional response. When I took on this assignment, I thought that Eero Saarinen did very expressive structures like the TWA and the MIT building, but it gave me a chance to dig deeper into his portfolio of work. And now I see how very different all of his buildings are and how they really do account for the sites that they're built on and the context that they're built within. They also respond to the demands of the program. So I think that, to me, really gave me a big appreciation, a greater appreciation of his work. he wasn't trapped into doing one style of architecture. He allowed the projects to take on their own form, and he found how to express his architectural thoughts in different ways. And I think you can see that in the embassy in the UK. It's very different from the other buildings that he's done. One of the reasons I picked the embassy is because our team in Ottawa is working on the Canadian embassy in Sri Lanka. So I thought it'd be interesting to see how Eero looked at embassies in general. One of the things about embassies are they're representational buildings. They need to express the country that they're built for. And I think when you look at the London embassy, it took on the form and shape it did. It responds to the site. It's a lower building. The site was a compact site in an area with lower buildings. But I think you're immediately struck by the rectilinear form and the detailing, and it's very well resolved execution, like all of his buildings are. The embassy is technically masterful and aesthetically beautiful. It has that diagrid that is on the facade, which is a very modern take and contemporary take of creating openings in a facade, and it's has that formidable eagle. So really an imposing power. It imposes kind of the power of the United States, but it's playful in nature because the grid is shifting and it's very open in the amount of fenestration into the interior spaces. I found that kind of interesting and how it conveys a sense of openness, but also a sense of strength that you would want in an American embassy. And the other thing I found interesting is that his work it's modern architecture, but it isn't about less is more. He actually has a lot of small details that convey a lot of interest and intricate ways of assembling different materials together. And you see in that the image of the facade that you have these large concrete diagrid, but in between that there's these finer details that kind of come through in bronze. So for me, I was really impressed with just how he built or designed a building that really responded to the needs of the program and in a unique way.
Thank you, Tobias. That was very good. So we'll move on to our next speaker, and it's someone who is certainly a good friend of mine. It's somebody that was at NORR before I joined NORR, and stayed with NORR for some time, and then actually became our client at NORR for a short period of time, and then became somebody that went back into the industry at Arup, and we have done work with certainly in the past, and has remained a friend with us, and someone that I didn't have a choice but call upon to talk about the next Saarinen project, and it's Ralph Orr from Arup. Ralph, hopefully you're on the line.
Yep, I'm on the line. I just have this multiple muting system going on. But thanks for the intro, Silvio. We do still have to get together for a birthday lunch one of these days.
One of these days, we will.
But of all the buildings you've talked about, I've only had the opportunity to visit two of them. First, the Dulles terminal, which I really love. But I do actually have a more personal connection, although be it somewhat peripheral, with the TWA terminal, since I've had an opportunity to work on the terminal, the JetBlue terminal that replaced it. But I have to admit from the outset that I have never been inside the TWA terminal. Alas, I hope to So I've seen it from the outside, but I've never been inside, a loss that I hope to rectify in the near future now that it's taken on a new life as a hotel. To me, this building brings to mind a number of issues associated with historic and important architecture when they no longer are suited for their original purpose. In fact, there are probably few building types that have gone through more radical and frequent changes than terminal buildings. And this one opened in 1962 with one satellite, and 5 years later, a second satellite with a different configuration was added. And then in the intervening years, the processor was extended and modified in a number of ways until it was closed and then replaced with the new 26-gate JetBlue terminal. But fortunately, this one was designated as a historical building, so the designers of the new terminal were challenged to accommodate it in the overall planning. In fact, I know from personal experience that even those pedestrian tubes, which you may almost see in this photograph, well, one on the left-hand side, those were also part of the historical designation and posed considerable challenges when it came to the design of the terminal curbs. And this makes me reflect on other buildings like the Toronto Terminal 1, or the original Terminal 1 designed by John B. Parkin, which I also think of as an iconic building, which actually was never designated and seemed to disappear without a whimper. But sadly, the TWA terminal sat idle for many years until the current consortium proposed reinventing it as the lobby for a 500-room hotel with huge ballroom, meeting rooms, fitness center. There's a rooftop pool with a view out over the apron. Of course, there's the restaurants and bars, one of which is actually in the Lockheed Constellation, which you can see in the background of that image. Our firm was also involved in the engineering of the hotel, and so I've seen presentations of working within a historic building, which many of you who have worked on historic buildings will understand and appreciate the challenges of working with the original hand-drawn drawings, trying to figure out what was actually built and using new technology to do the cloud processing into Revit drawings and so on. But certainly the iconic nature of this building has given this hotel a totally unique pedigree, which I think, like other one-of-a-kind buildings like Bilbao and Sydney Opera House, attracts considerable attention and brings a whole economic benefits. So if you're in that whole process of trying to justify a design, there are these intrinsic, or I guess more difficult aspects to define about what value is. But just, I understand within the first 6 months since groundbreaking, there were over 100 media placements with like 475 million impressions, just to give you an idea of what, iconic design can really bring to a business. So now this is one of the Saarinen buildings that the public can once again enjoy. And in fact, I checked out on the website, you can actually stay in a room tonight for as little as $180 US. And although the original form may have been intended to represent an eagle in flight, it seems more apt today to think of it as a phoenix rising from the ashes of its previous life. There you go.
Thank you very much, Ralph. The next speaker that I have is David Cluzio, and David is going to talk about weathering steel. He's going to talk about the John Deere building.
Thank you, Silvio. I also have visited a number of Saarinen buildings over my years, the Dulles, the Chapel and the Auditorium at MIT, the St. Louis Arch, Cranbrook, and had a soft spot growing up for a number of his exuberant projects. But as I matured as an architect, I really developed an interest in this particular project, initially initiated by an interest in the, initially driven by this, this velvety cortan steel that Silvio was indicating. This was the first building that ever used it, and it was. I mean, there were descriptions of the farmer equipment salesmen who had been telling their staff for years, warning the farmers of, why they should buy a new John Deere, the rust, they shouldn't let their equipment get rusty. And they were saying, and now, the president of the company's making us work in a building that's totally a rust bucket. It was kind of took a little bit of adjustment there. But one of the interesting things that was part of my understanding of the building and the depth and detail and rigor that has been applied in the execution of the project is really partly about, and I have a quote I want to read by a critic of the time, John Jacobus. And this is, and I felt a little disappointed that I wasn't able to do the TWA terminal or some of the other projects because I was a little late in choosing my project. But I feel much better now that I read this critical review here, just to put this particular project in the context of all of Saarinen's work. So this is John Jacobus talking about Eero Saarinen was a singular architect during a decade of modernist conformity. The urge that drove him to make every design a new start, a new beginning, in which accumulated gains of personal experience could only be used in peripheral or incidental ways, exacted a terrible toll in terms of bogus monuments and pretentious structural soliloquies. Yet, in spite of everything, of the naive commemorative arch, the flawed yet striking airport terminal, and the earnest bombastic embassies, we sense that he was driving at some certain thing just beyond the threshold of his as well as of our own awareness. I think it is likely that the future will cherish his work, even the botched jobs, because he is willing to plunge into the unknown. While it would be an exaggeration to claim that the John Deere and Company Administration Center would have inaugurated a new phase in his work, since in effect every one of his buildings represented a new style or category, we do encounter there a really different tone, a profundity in his work. At last we have from his pen a total and organic design. What mattered to Jacobus was that at John Deere, in quotes again, was that at John Deere, Saarinen had rescued this design idiom of crisp details and sharp linear contours from further debasement at the hands of fashionable decorators. John Deere, by its constructive clarity, its box-like forms, and its stress on right-angle intersections, turned its back upon the immaturities of Dulles and TWA, with their sagging shell vaults and their inconclusiveness of IBM Yorktown, where rough masonry and random forms were compete in futile contrast with the sleek curve of the glass wall. Now, those are kind of fighting words, I have to say, but it does drive home at that time the importance that the architectural critics of the time, which were not, and I have to admit, I missed a little bit of the beginning of Silvio's talk, so he may have covered some of this. He was not a favorite of the critics of the time always, but in this case, it immediately won the 25-year award and many of the awards at the time. And I just couldn't resist including this one little picture in the corner, which broke the rules of Silvio's selection process, to highlight an interior there and just these amazing floating desks there, which is just, once again, almost the surreal architectural conception that this brilliant architect brought to all of his work. And in spite of the quote, I still really do like TWA and many of these other obviously more flamboyant and in a way architecturally heroic projects. But I just was overwhelmed. The more I studied this particular building, just the depth and richness and consideration of every single detail. I mean, there's a quote in one place about how it's one of the most beautiful theaters in contemporary architecture, and really what it's showing is farm equipment on display. I mean, that's just another thing. And you could talk about the siting and all kinds of other things, and how, you know, instead of on a mountain, he built it in a valley, all of these aspects of it that are just so really the work of an incredibly mature designer. And what a loss that this was one of his last building. I don't have anything more to add to that.
Thank you, David. I'm glad that you finally realized that you got a good building to do in this presentation. Sorry for this going so long, but I think this has all been great with people's comments coming after. We have one more to go, and I've asked, and as all of you know, we only had one chair, and in the presentation. So I have asked Molly Scott at NORR, who actually did a presentation 2 presentations ago at the NORR Ed, to comment on Eero Saarinen and this presentation. So Molly Scott, can you please come on the line?
I am here. I do have to point out that I am currently sitting at the Saarinen Tulip table at our Knoll showroom. I thought it was quite fitting. So first of all, thank you, Silvio, so much. I feel truly honored that you asked me to participate. And I also wanted to just thank everybody else who was able to join today. Is the photo up? It is. Perfect. This actually is one of my absolute favorite photographs of Eero Saarinen and Florence Knoll, or Shoo, as her friends would call her. After they met at Cranbrook, Shoo spent summers with the Saarinen family, and the two of them developed a very brother-sister-like bond. And the incredible relationship only got stronger for the rest of their lives. Due to their sibling-like relationship, Eero looked to Shoo as his most honest and toughest critic, which ended up making them a pretty incredible team. Once Florence joined Knoll, it was an absolute given that Shoo had asked Eero to design for us. The pedestal collection was designed in 1957 and went into production in 1958, and Florence was there to offer her input the whole way. He wanted to design something that, I'm going to read this quote, even though I should know it, design something that would eliminate the, quote, ugly, confusing, and unrestful world that lays beneath tables and chairs. He wanted to, again, quote, clear up the slum of legs. There would have been hundreds and probably hundreds of drawings, followed by little models that would have probably fit into a tiny dollhouse. Then eventually came the full-scale models, and all the while he would be tweaking the design with clay. Eventually, once the full-size models were furniture, they would be sent home to be tried by family and friends, including Florence Knoll. The Tulip collection actually lived at the Saarinen house for this very purpose before the full production. It's pretty amazing that this particular collection, it actually continues to be our top selling table within Knoll Studio, both residential, commercial, and hospitality. And I thought that was a lovely way to kind of wrap things up. So again, thank you all so very much. And Silvio, I feel very honored and grateful that you asked me to participate.
Molly, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your presentation that you did at the NORR Ed. And I don't think we could have concluded this session with Eero Saarinen without having you come on and talk about Knoll. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one last final slide. So for me to end where I started when I was in grade 9, I had no idea that I would become an architect, but I did know that Eero Saarinen was a great architect. Today I know he is a master architect, one that we can learn from, not copy, as he never copied, but learn from his approach to architecture, that each project is unique, technology is important, that you need to push yourself to be a great architect. I was reading something today that Renzo Piano has said in the past many times, and that is that without experimentation, nothing really matters. And if you look at Eero Saarinen, He talks about experimentation in all of his projects, and Renzo Piano talks about the fact that you need to have 3 lives. You need to live till 60, and then and 2 other 60s beyond that, because you learn by the time you get to your first 60, and then the next 60 you develop, and then the other 60 is when you teach. Unfortunately, Eero Saarinen's life was quite short, and you can just imagine what he could have accomplished if he had lived beyond the years that he did. So that's the end of my presentation. What Eero Saarinen had accomplished in his short life was an incredible life, as you've seen with the projects that I've presented. And he's somebody that certainly that we can, as I said earlier, learn from the approach and push ourselves to become better architects. Thank you. With that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
That's just a comment, Silvio. Thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation by you and by everyone. That was great, all the contributions. My question and comment was with regards to the St. Louis Arch. When I was doing my PhD, I had done a software that deals with incremental construction. And to my horror, when I submitted this and I was about to go out of the door with being done and so on, one of the examiners wanted me to do the analysis for the St. Louis Arch to show how the incremental construction of that arch was completed in terms of how the 2 kind of legs met at the top. I kind of used my charm to talk him out of it, so I never did the actual analysis. But it is something, in addition to the accuracy of all of the construction, the issue of the deflection as the legs go up, and predicting that and making sure that the deflection together with the accuracy in fact get the 2 points to meet at the top. So that was truly a fantastic kind of project to have been completed this way.
Thank you, Hassan. I think what's incredible about the Gateway Arch is that you rarely have architects that collaborate closely with engineers, because it truly is an engineering building. But certainly, as you see with most of his buildings, there was huge collaborations with engineers on his buildings, on almost all of his buildings.
We have one question on the chat. Do you know if his children designed today?
I don't. Chad, do you? Maybe Chad does. The Detroit office is closer.
I don't know the answer to that. Sorry, Silvio.
Eric, his first son is a producer. He's not in the design realm. He's produced a number of films. He's actually done some filming on Eero Saarinen, but I'm not sure about his other children.
Yeah, Eric was from the first of his first family, and I'm not sure the second.
His first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Alex from Detroit is asking, how would you suggest professionals get involved in preserving or providing awareness of mid-century modern architecture buildings within their community, even if the buildings were not designed by famous architects?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, really promoting those buildings through, the architectural associations. I mean, bringing them to the forefront. Obviously, if the buildings have heritage designations, that's a good way to, as Ralph Orr said, the Terminal 1 building at the airport was never designated, and it's gone for good. But you know, heritage designation is one way of preserving buildings. I mean, once you have a heritage designation, you've definitely locked in the building. But a lot of buildings are lost because they're not deemed to be important. There was a building, a NORR building in Toronto, the BATA headquarters building that was demolished a few years ago, that wasn't deemed to be an important building. But certainly, if you know of buildings that are in your cities or in your area, you know, promoting those buildings and probably getting them listed or heritage listed, that's probably the best way to preserving those buildings.
There is an organization called Docomomo, which you could look into. It's about preserving modern architecture, an international organization. There's Canadian and American branches.
Thanks, David. Okay, so we've hit 12 midnight in Switzerland. I'm not sure if Thierry is still on the line. So we said that we would try to keep it to the 2 hours. So just want to thank everybody for being on the line, and hopefully you found the presentation interesting. And hopefully you won't forget who Eero Saarinen is. We will let everyone know about the next NORR. It'll be probably the last week of September. We have an October one that we've also arranged for, and we will have a November one as well. So want to thank everyone, and have a great evening. Thank you all.